On the morning of April 3rd, 2024, Taiwan faced a powerful earthquake. Despite the ferocity of the tremors, the nation stood resilient, a testament to its stringent building codes and meticulous preparedness protocols. In stark contrast, the Pacific Northwest of North America faces a looming catastrophe from the Cascadia Subduction Zone, a geological time bomb that could trigger an earthquake of unimaginable magnitude and a colossal tsunami. This isn't speculation. Over 300 years ago, a similar seismic event, known as the Great Quake, wiped out entire Indigenous communities along the Pacific coast, leaving behind tragic oral histories that recount the disaster as a great drowning. The lessons of the past and recent warnings suggest the west coast of North America is woefully unprepared. In Taiwan and Japan, meticulous planning and engineering have minimized devastation. But on the west coast of North America, there's a dangerous gap in readiness. The haunting oral histories from Indigenous survivors of the Great Quake offer grim warnings, foreshadowing how British Columbia and the entire Pacific Northwest could once again face mass devastation. Today we're examining a huge issue that affects 62% of the Earth's population. That's 5 billion people. Earthquakes. They've destroyed nations. They're talked about in legends around the world. They're unpredictable, frightening, and deadly. We're starting to figure out things we can do to minimize the tragedy they can cause. But earthquake preparedness, even in wealthy regions of the world that are threatened by earthquakes, is not all that great. We're going to start by taking a close look at the world leader in earthquake preparedness, Taiwan. Taiwan recently experienced a powerful 7.4 magnitude earthquake.
That is a big, big earthquake that I thought, this is big trouble. If you get an earthquake of that size, that generates a large amount of ground shaking. They were worried about tsunamis. That didn't happen, but the ground shaking was so strong that I thought this is going to be a disaster. And it was a disaster. You can't avoid an earthquake of that size close to a city and not have huge problems.
Despite the potential for catastrophic damage, the death toll and structural damage were relatively contained.
We see, the buildings that do collapse or damaged. We see the rock falls that were triggered by the earthquake. So we're seeing the worst that happened in Taiwan. And but if you look at the bottom line is the country continues now. They haven't forgotten about it by any means, but it hasn't totally shut down their economy. Fortunately, the earthquake was far enough away from Taipei, which is their very large, kind of almost a megacity, that it caused very little damage there. But it was strongly felt over 100 kilometers away. They get a lot of earthquakes. 7 earthquakes of magnitude 7 or larger in the past 50 years. Imagine that. We have had on the west coast of Canada 0 of that size. They had the worst of them, however, in 1999, which is called the Chi-Chi earthquake.
On September 21st, 1999, this major disaster led to the deaths of almost 2,500 people.
The Chi-Chi earthquake was a real killer. It was even bigger than this one in early April. It had a magnitude of 7.7. That's what we would call borderline great earthquake. You would not have wanted to be in Taiwan when that earthquake struck. It was huge. It caused enormous damage, killed over 2,000 people, injured tens of thousands. And even though Taiwan had had a number of magnitude 7 earthquakes prior to that in 1999, it really wasn't that ready for something that big. And I'm not sure very many places on Earth would be ready for an earthquake of that magnitude.
Taiwan has become one of the world's most prepared nations for such disasters. Following the 1999 Shishi earthquake, Taiwan overhauled its approach to earthquake safety. They upgraded building codes, established rigorous public education on earthquake readiness, and implemented a sophisticated early warning system.
It was a total wake-up call, is what I would call it. The entire country galvanized to prevent damage on that scale, loss of life on that scale. And so since then, they've had probably the best or among the best earthquake standards for construction in the world. And they regularly revise their building codes so that they're quite top of the line. They have one of the world's best networks of seismometers. They practice earthquake drills in their schools, so that when an earthquake does strike, they can get back to some sense of normality very quickly. But I think the real factor is their experience with earthquakes. If you have experienced earthquakes, you kind of have some sense why we're going to have them in the future, and they will. And so they're as well prepared as you can possibly be.
Taiwan implemented a sophisticated early warning system that leverages the latest in seismology and communications technology. This system can detect seismic activity and send alerts to all mobile phones in the affected area within seconds. This advanced warning gives people crucial moments to take cover, secure their surroundings, and brace for impact, reducing the likelihood of injuries and fatalities.
It's called an early warning system. It doesn't predict earthquakes days or weeks in advance, but it gives you a little bit of lead time that an earthquake has occurred somewhere nearby, and that in a minute you're going to experience strong ground shaking. And that's allowed Japan, in the most recent big earthquake that they had, to shut down their rail lines, automatically. It's totally automated. Their rail lines are shut down. You don't have trains running off the tracks, colliding with one another, and it worked brilliantly. And we're kind of looking at that in BC, because our biggest source of earthquakes is offshore, and it would take probably about 90 seconds for the shaking, once it starts, to actually reach, say, Vancouver. So, if you have a way of notifying people, and people are well enough educated to do something, it's a good tool for reducing at least the injury to people that might occur during that earthquake.
In places like British Columbia, on the west coast of North America, the threat of the big one, a potential megathrust earthquake, looms large. It's a seismic event that could be even more devastating than what Taiwan has experienced. Scientists predict that it could reach magnitude 9 due to the subduction of the Juan de Fuca plate beneath North America.
Taiwan and the coast of BC are both located along what's called the Pacific Ring of Fire, and this is kind of a girdle that follows the shores of the Pacific Ocean.
But unlike Taiwan, which experiences frequent smaller quakes that help release tectonic stress, BC's seismic activity is characterized by long periods of inactivity, followed by massive quakes. This unpredictability adds to the potential severity.
So we do get very large earthquakes here. There's no doubt about that. We can't pretend that we're not going to get a damaging earthquake in the future.
It raises urgent questions about the state of preparedness. If we consider buildings and structures alone, new structures are definitely designed with modern seismic standards in mind. And most bridges, schools, hospitals, and other critical infrastructure have been upgraded too. However, there are thousands of older buildings and infrastructure that will likely not be able to handle a large earthquake. When it comes to technological aids, such as early warning systems, places like British Columbia are still exploring the full potential of these technologies. Work has been underway to get the EEWS for BC operational for the last 5 years, and to network it with Canada's national EEWS. In the coming months, Ocean Networks Canada's Earthquake Early Warning System will officially launch after years of development to become one of the most advanced of its kind in the world.
I think the government has done a pretty good job of preparing our infrastructure for a damaging earthquake. What I worry about is more people's lack of preparedness. You know, we're going to run around like deers caught in the headlights of a vehicle, you know. And I can only imagine what would happen if we had a damaging earthquake. People would be ill prepared and they would be kind of panicky, and that doesn't help when you're trying to recover.
Public awareness and education also play a vital role in our preparedness strategy. Unlike Taiwan, where regular drills and extensive public education campaigns are the norm, BC might not have the same level of public engagement and awareness regarding earthquake preparedness. Enhancing the general population's knowledge about what to do before, during, and after an earthquake is essential. It not only saves lives, but also helps to maintain order during chaotic post-earthquake scenarios.
It's people's natural inclination not to worry about things they haven't experienced regularly. This is just reality, and I hate to say it, but people have limited awareness. They kind of understand, maybe not very consciously, but they understand we live in earthquake country here. But there's kind of also, I think, this natural view, we've never been damaged by an earthquake, so why should I worry about it? And that is a bit of a problem.
How can we be so sure an earthquake is coming? Because they've always been here, just not in a long time. Up until the 1980s, there was little concern about the serious threat of earthquakes on the west coast of North America. That's until scientists started doing more research. They were introduced to a rich oral history of Indigenous peoples' experience with earthquakes. And in the earth along vast stretches of coastline, they uncovered a layer of sand that they came to realize was from a giant tsunami. They analyzed these deep-sea sediments, the coastal vegetation, and Native American accounts, and uncovered the history of catastrophic megaquakes in the Cascadia region, overturning previous assumptions about its seismic hazard. They discovered 40-plus megaquakes in 10,000 years by piecing oral history and sediment records together. That's one every 250 years. The last one was in 1700. Plus 250 is... well, that's why the concern. We're overdue. When the Cascadia earthquake hits, it will likely be a subduction earthquake.
It's where one of these very large fragments of the crust is moving down slowly beneath North America. And it's creating the kind of compressional forces that ultimately cause the crust to rupture and produce shaking.
Subducting earthquakes, resulting from tectonic plate collisions, have left profound marks in history with devastating consequences. The magnitude 9.2 earthquake in Alaska in 1964. In 1960, Chile experienced a magnitude 9.5 quake. And a magnitude 9 event in Japan in 2011 caused widespread destruction through ground shaking, but also triggered massive tsunamis that further compounded the devastation. On the west coast of North America, cities are vulnerable to two types of quakes: the megaquake caused by subduction and smaller quakes caused by fault lines.
The main source of the earthquake is offshore. It's not all localized on that big, we call it a megathrust fault, but the whole overlying fragment of the crust, you know, that we all live on, which is called North American plate, is highly fractured and broken. These don't produce magnitude 8 or 9 earthquakes, but they do produce magnitude 6 and 7 earthquakes. And if one of those faults happens to be that ruptures is close to a big city, then you have a huge disaster. The shaking might not last as long as it would during a magnitude 8 earthquake, but it's incredibly strong because the epicenter is so close to an urban environment. So those are the ones we worry about. These magnitude 9 earthquakes that you hear so much about that are offshore occur every 400 to 500 years. Now, the smaller earthquakes, that's perhaps what we should really worry about, is a magnitude 6 or a magnitude 7 earthquake with an epicenter very close to, say, Vancouver. Big concern for magnitude 6 and 7 earthquakes is this secondary phenomenon called liquefaction. And liquefaction is a product of the cyclic shaking, the ground motion. Sands, gravels can actually totally transform from a solid to a liquid state. It's bizarre. The areas where that will occur along our river plains, and particularly beneath what we call the Fraser Delta. 250,000 people living on that surface, and some of the most important infrastructure elements in Canada, the airport, the Delta port. This is not just British Columbia we're talking about. If that infrastructure is damaged, it's the entire country. Boy, if we lose that, we got huge problems. We don't recover from that very quickly.